Hi, good afternoon once again. Welcome to Strategy Hour. My name is Jamal, and today we have before I go further, please, if you guys can hear me, maybe a reaction or something, so I know that you guys can hear me. All right, thank you so much. Yeah. So welcome. Today, like we always say, we'll be saying it around this class. A lot of strategies about thinking, but there's one core part that the clients will see first before they do anything. There's one core part that's really important. This is the document you're presenting, your deliverable every day to them, and how do you build that? How do you convince the clients? To me, I see strategy as I have an agenda. I need to convince the next person, the client, to see my POV, accept it, buy into it. How do you create a document like that you don't have to argue all the time to get your success in? And this topic is what led to this thought is what led to this particular topic that we'll have today. Also because our facilitators today, I've known them as a leading strategy for a while outside of I follow their work, I see what they do, and then I got fortunate. We work in the same space now. I get to see how much of what I used to see from afar is in them, in how they work, in how they present, in how they narrate documents, in how they put thoughts together and keep pulling things for the clients to see. So that's why like this class is very fun for me too. So welcome everybody. AO from SO&U is senior deputy director of strategy on their MTN account and he's been doing great things. Beyond that, is somebody I like to see that I'm a strategist that plays his hair, keep different kind of hairstyles. So whenever I see him, it gives me confidence that yeah, this is somebody I heard that's fun. Not all about everybody be serious. Strategists are supposed to wear glass and look serious and look curious and all of that. This is one fun person. So so yeah, you guys show me to welcome him, and I'm going to give the mic to him. He has his discussion to take us through the class however he wants to handle it. We usually have 1 hour for this. Thank you, Ayo. I'm handing over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Jam Jam, my guy. Thank you so much, right? And good afternoon, everyone. I think something that Jamal also said that is really crucial, right, is that as a strategist, I don't know if every single person on this call is a strategist, but if I, by any chance you identify as a strategist, you need to be the fun guy in the room, right? Because essentially you're like the forerunner of the creative process. You're the one who everyone is going to feed from. From whether it's a energetic point of view, whether it's from an information point of view, right? You're the one who is going to set the tone. So as much as you can, you know, be the fun guy in the room or the fun girl in the room. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to put my camera on. Jam Jam, please advise. What
Uh,
happened?
the policy is you have the class today. So, however, approach if you want all of us to put a camera around you,
Ah, ah,
so you are in charge. So, your approach is what we're going to go with.
all right. Okay. So guys, what let's vote now. We're in a democracy, right? Do we all want to put on our cameras, or do we want me to put on my camera, or we can just flow as it is? What do you guys think? This thing has to be interactive, or we've agreed to be fun guys in the room, so everybody has to ginger me, right? So please, someone say something in the chat. Unmute your mic. Tell me, should we stay as is? See, boom shot. Ah, ah, Omo, yeah. Is this how you used to do, yeah? Eh?
Let's go with the flow.
All right, okay, cool. So I can I can put on my camera. If I feel shy at any point, I'll turn it back off. But yeah. Um just hold on while I try to share my screen. Okay. So guys, please help me confirm that you can see my screen, please. right, so let's try and jump in as smoothly as we can, right? So essentially, the brief was to um, more or less speak to more or less speak to how you can make your strategy documents, right? What are the rudiments of winning, with with your strategy decks and the rest of that. So I just took the liberty to translate that into, winning with strategy, both for your campaigns and for your clients, right? Okay. So, for those of us who don't know me, right, my name is Eyo Inamiti. Some of my people who happen to be on this call as well, fondly also know me as the Oracle, right? I'm a BBSM strategist, and by BBSM, I'm talking about brand, business, sales, and marketing strategist, right? I fancy myself a possibility specialist, a solutions shape shifter. In other words, whatever is required, to bring out a solution, I'm more than willing and happy to adapt, right? So whether it's, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, right, or even building the tunnel that leads to the said light, I like to see my approach to work, as that blue ocean approach where you're not necessarily trying to play where everyone already is. For those of us who have read Blue Ocean Strategy, right, you're being able to zag when everyone is zigging is kind of how I try to approach work. And and I've noticed that doing that has kind of helped most of the brands I've worked on, experience some form of evolutionary trajectory, right? So in the midst of all of that, where you would find me, where I like to play, one thing I could call an ingredient or like some kind of sauce, to winning for me, right, is that wherever you find research and you find culture, where those two things meet, that's where you find me, right? And I use those elements essentially, to build strategies that are as distinct as possible, and God willing, that has been able to translate into award-winning work. And some of the brands I've had the opportunity of working on, some really some really blood-sucking brands, right? Some really interesting and challenging brands, right? You have the Visas, you have the FCMB, you have the AXA, the Polaris Bank, NCR, CRBITS, TGI, a couple of Nestle brands, Pepsi, Jack Daniels, Macallan, a couple of brands in the Chi house, namely Chivita and Hollandia, American Cola, and even the likes of MTN, Samsung, ALX, Oppo, Prime Video, DSTV, and Film House. There's a lot more, right? So these are just the ones that were able to make it down here, right? And on that note, we're going to be jumping even further into this presentation, and I'll be saying that I'm going to be sharing some powerful secrets today, and permit me to call them powerful, right? And the saying that goes that with great power comes great responsibility. So I would really urge most of you to use this, wisely, carefully, and ethically, right? Because a lot of the things I'll be sharing are essentially things that mostly only my colleagues, know about. Um, I don't know when did Google change their mechanism where I can't even change the slides from this interface. But anyway, right? As we dive even further, right? Let's we're going to try and answer that big question. So how do we win with strategy? Whether it's for campaigns or whether it's for clients. And sometimes your clients could even be the creatives on your team, you know, and it begs the question, how do you win, right? Is it through frameworks, which is what I think some of you that must have come for this strategy hour might think this is about, but sadly, I'm not sure that's what this is going to be about, because frameworks only frame thinking, they don't do the work. That is still majorly your responsibility. Frameworks, once upon a time, they used to be the cheat codes, because they essentially used to help the creative process with dimensioning. It used to help with harmonizing thinking across creative shops. And by creative shops, I'm talking about agencies. A lot of agencies used to have their operational frameworks, whether it's Ogilvy, whether it's the disruption from TBWA, whether it's the original effect from Ideas Origin Media, right? Even whether it's Marcoins, for those of you who have worked at Insight, you'll be familiar with that. Whether it's Humankind, those of you who have worked at Leo Burnett will be familiar with that. Or even those within the Saatchi network, right? You would have heard of the brutal simplicity of thought. But at the end of the day, as a strategist, it is still your responsibility to breathe life into your work. So permit me to say that this class will not be about frameworks, right? So if that's what you came for, just sit tight, right? I think we have something better. Then it even begs the second question, is it through storytelling? Storytelling is one of the many buzzwords within our industry space. If you get on LinkedIn, you will not read 2, 3, 4 lines. Somebody has dropped storytelling, right? But at the end of the day, a story is only as good as the person telling it, or even it's only as good as you tell it, how it's being told, right? And that's why, from that point of view, it's also very advisable to leverage popular ones, and by saying leverage popular stories, that's how you hear about being able to utilize popular culture, because essentially
Hi,
what.
hi. Sorry to interrupt you. I think everybody is saying there's a bit of noise every 10 seconds, and I hear it too. I thought it was my network, but it's almost like a breeze or something.
Breeze. Oh, let me.
Move from your fan, you.
I found and you don't want me to. It's okay. The breeze has stopped now, Abi.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, now. You people cannot manage small 10 seconds interruption. You want me to sweat? Well, it's okay. Let's go on. But have we've been hearing me, right? We've been following along with what I've been saying. All right, cool. So yeah, like I was saying, right? What's being able to leverage storytelling is a powerful tool, and even further down the line, being able to leverage popular culture, which can also be called popular stories, is that essentially what you're doing is that you're making whatever strategy, whatever case you're trying to make, you're making it more familiar. That's essentially what memes do. They make certain concepts more familiar based on media that people are essentially already conversant with, right? And then based on all of this, after all of the questioning, is it about frameworks winning, is it about storytelling, it then occurred to me that there's the software side of things and there's also the hardware side of things, right? And where the hardware would come in would be all the templates, all the frameworks, but then I've realized that since form follows function, that's a quote that is within the art space, right? That the form of something is supposed to follow the functionality of that thing, right? And essentially what that translates to is that no matter the template that I show you, it will be difficult for you to have a working system, without the right programming, so essentially we're talking by right programming, we're talking about the right mindset, we're talking about the right software. So majority of what we're going to be doing today is going to be mindset forming. Being able to win with strategy is something that takes years. It's something that takes perfecting. It's something that takes repetition. So that might be difficult to fit into just one class. So hopefully, Jam Jam might be gracious enough to invite us back again to continue. But I think I'm someone who really likes to start things from the beginning. Anyone that knows me knows that I don't like, I'm very finicky about incomplete things, right? So it would be my pleasure to take you from the beginning of how you can actually build, not just the destination of winning, but even the habits and the process of winning. And I'd like us to start with this video.
Mr. Strong, do you really believe that strength has any?
Can you guys see the video? Can you hear the video? I need.
Yes, I can see, I can hear it.
All right. So whenever I ask questions like this, right, I'm not on the Google interface, so I need someone to just respond. Jam Jam, please just take note of that, right? So let's get back to this.
Sure. I wanted to make a note that usually this lasts for 1 hour. Google usually cuts us off by
Yeah, yeah,
1 hour.
yeah, no, short thing,
But
short thing.
if you want us, if we are still have time, I think we did it in last class and it was fun. We had to come back, everybody jump on a new link and it was really cool.
All
So
right.
if we still have something to do, we'll just do that so that we can finish the class because it looks interesting already.
Oh, okay, cool, cool, cool. So where would, if by any chance that happens, where would the link, where would we be dropping the link? Is it on the chat or where?
I would drop it to our personal class group and I would drop it on the chats too.
Oh, okay, okay. Because I'm not sure I'm on your personal chat group, but
Yeah, but I'll share with you shortly.
I'm sure you have it figured out. Okay, so let's jump right
Mr. Strong, do you really believe that strength... Mr. Strong, do you really believe that strength has anything to do with whether you win or lose? You will always be weaker. You will always be smaller and at a disadvantage. He is beating you because you are allowing him to define the terms of the contest. You want to win? Change the terms. Improvise, adapt, cheat. Lean into your strengths, not his. Fight like a girl.
All right. So essentially, I'm sure we all listen to that, right? And please don't cheat, oh, right? Just take the important parts of the message, and it's essentially talking about how whenever you're, whether it's in a client presentation, because just like that video, a client would usually know about their business more than you, right? So as a strategist, you have to lean into your own strengths, and as a strategist, what is your strength is your ability to understand the consumer, right? The ability to advocate for the consumer. And the way that usually happens is by making sure you put yourself in the situations that the consumer would ordinarily experience, right? And essentially what that simply means is that your strategy deck, it doesn't start on a PowerPoint presentation, right? Your strategy deck starts with you. And I always say that, strategy is the science of society, and what that simply means is it's understanding the mechanics of social life, right? That's where you're talking about pain points, you're talking about need states, you're talking about psychography, demography, all of that is related to the society. So when you have this understanding, right, your social life, whether it's even social media, it becomes more of a tool than a pastime. Whenever I'm on social media, I'm collecting information, or I'm not just liking posts or commenting, right? I'm essentially looking at comments. Comments are like an opportunity for social listening. Those are responses. Each relevant post is like a survey. So on that note, I would urge you, the first um ingredient to winning is to get enthusiastic about life, right? Fill yourself with experiences, and in turn, what happens is that your work becomes experiential. Your work, it tends to have a certain life to it, because you're not just speaking in abstracts, and that's a lot of the time the mistake that core strategy will channel you towards. It feels like an opportunity for mental gymnastics, whereas strategy is simply being able to establish clarity in the midst of confusion, right? And in the midst of that, you don't need more complication. You need things to be as fluid as possible, which is where even the reference I made about being able to leverage popular culture, being able to leverage storytelling comes in, right? And like I also said, as a strategist, you are the forerunner, of the creative process. You're like the John the Baptist, so whoever the Messiah is going to be, whether it's the creatives or whether it's the client, or essentially you're the one that paves the way. I'd like to play another video.
What makes someone great at anything? Not talent, not luck, not some secret formula. It's an art, and here's how to master it. Step 1, respect the craft. Half focus gets half results. Act like what you're doing matters, even when no one's watching. And have a relentless focus on the task at hand. Step 2, Obsess over the basics. Hokusai made 30,000 pieces, but the world remembers one. Step 3. Love repetition. Not results, not applause. Repetition. The process. The tiny habits. Novak Djokovic said, I love hitting the tennis ball. That's the mindset. Not chasing glory, just loving the work. Start there. Refine it. Repeat it. And one day, the world will remember yours too.
Yeah. So yeah, just like what the video says, right? I already said it as well. Winning in strategy is not luck. It is not something that happens overnight, right? It's something that requires repetition. It's something that requires loving the work. And if there's anything, anyone can say about me confidently, is that I love my job, right? I love strategy because essentially, like I said, it is the science of society. And for those of us who have the opportunity of being strategists, essentially you're getting paid to experience life. So like I said, be more enthusiastic about life. Live. You know, there is no room for you to call yourself an introvert if you want to be a strategist. You have to, even if you're more disposed to being an inside body, and the rest of that, you have to become an ambivert, right? Where when the opportunity comes to experience life, don't take it as being outside, right? Take it as an opportunity to experience life. When that presents itself, I advise you to always take it. You know,
What makes someone great at
next, I would also like to say that, even drilling deeper into this so-called strategy document, right? I need you to understand that your strategy document is like it should be like a lived experience. I've had the opportunity of sitting in strategy sessions where there's so much text. There's so much ambiguity. There's so much big English. There's so much, and you begin to ask yourself, because the moment you even look at the presentation, you're already feeling confused, and that shouldn't be you, right? When you're presenting strategy, you should be looking to simulate an experience, and by simulating an experience, I'm saying that you need to make sure your document feels like something. And I'm sure for those of you who must have been paying attention to this presentation from the beginning, you must have started feeling something. There's this feeling attached to it, as opposed to just talking, as opposed to just saying stuff, right? That's where the use of pop culture comes in. Like I said, the use of storytelling. It has to be as interactive as possible. Personally, I would even say your each slide should be divided into three, right? Or even divided into three. One third of that slide should be like maybe text, if at all, and then two thirds has to be something interactive. And by when we're talking about making your document something that someone can feel, is because I'm essentially telling you to leverage emotion. Many of us think emotion is something flimsy, something intangible, but the truth is, emotion is logic that has not yet been explained, right? Your body has picked up certain signals, your body has translated certain data that is turning it, that has turned into a feeling, but it also have an explanation, so it feels like it's not tangible. But the truth is, emotion will always eat up logic every day. That's why you hear people saying things like, oh, I'm just doing this and I'm not really sure why, but I'm doing it, right? And that's also something you need to learn how to tap into as far as winning is concerned. Because if you want to stay in the logical side of things, there's a chance that because of how, strategy is a lot like music. Everybody thinks they can sing until they have to be on like a game show or they have to actually sing. That's where you see people singing off key till the point they probably want to even break the key. And that's essentially how strategy can be. Because everyone can think, everyone thinks that everyone assumes that having an opinion is strategy, right? So there's a tendency for people to want to argue with you if you want to dwell on logic, but you have to find ways to introduce emotion. That's where you try to introduce even humor, and essentially there's something a mentor used to say to me, that your document should be the first ad. you know just think about it, that you do your documents in such an interactive way that it feels like, if at all, for those of us who are within the comms space, that when you're done with your strategy document, the person has already shot the ad in their minds, right? So essentially, a great strategy document, it just doesn't inform, right? It performs. It's a performance. That's why it's called a presentation a lot of the time, right? It's a stage, and it's essentially a lived experience. So on that note, you have to always prioritize inspiration over information. So even when you get data, right, it shouldn't stop as just data points. You need to find ways to translate that into something inspiring, right? Get people listening to you to say things like, oh, ah, I didn't see it from that angle, right? So prioritize feeling over facts, because facts you can get from Google. While you see feeling, you have to work for it, right? Because feeling is real time. It has to be now, you know. And that also informs something I usually like to do when I'm trying to develop my documents and the rest of that, right? I try to use things that happen. If probably my presentation is tomorrow, if something happened, or should I say, if my presentation is today, maybe this evening, if something happened that is relevant to what I'm doing, in the news or what have you, today, I will include it. That way, you're entering into the mind of whoever it is you're talking to. The person is trusting you in a way that, oh, this thing happened today, and this guy is already, or this babe is already telling me this. That means, okay, down the line I can even relax. Maybe there's something else that I'm not, that is new, right, that I can probably learn from. And that's also why I love trends, because trends are like animated data. It's essentially information that has been brought to life. And you see, when I talk about this whole thing about feeling over facts and the rest of that, right, there was this presentation that myself and someone who is on this call were privileged to be in. After we presented, especially from a strategy point of view, the client said, this is not a Google document. In other words, you took your time to do the groundwork, but at the same time, other than just the information of it, I'm inspired to take action based on what you've presented to me. And on that note, it's also essential for you to know your clients, and I mean really know them, right? What keeps them up at night? What makes them, cry for joy? What is their pain point? Gone. So as opposed to when you're developing your strategy document, you're trying to understand what's happening in the market, you're trying to understand what's happening in the life of the target audience and all of that. Also try to understand your clients, so that you're actually making a document for the person you want to win over, right? Speak from that point of view, because and a lot of the time, like I also said at the beginning, that your client could also be your creatives, right? It could be your colleagues, because it takes that entire ecosystem to win. So when I say that, when you're developing your documents, take into consideration the creatives, take into consideration your media people, right? Be as holistic as you can. And then again, another very interesting technique would be to use what I like to call inception, right? And inception essentially is being able to seed your conclusion, right, where you want to land, as gradual along the line of the presentation, right? Essentially, plant the seed of the idea so deep in your audience's mind that because of the repetition, and all of that, it begins to feel like they came up with the idea themselves, right? And in the midst of creating your strategy document, you need to try and keep your document as clean as possible, as short and simple as possible, which also brings us back to the whole two-third rule, where it don't overburden it with information, right? So on that note, I'd like us to please listen attentively, right? And this is how I learn. This is how I also like to teach, right? I like to, it almost comes across as a curation sometimes, but you see videos, there's so many things that are explained in so many in media that we can take advantage of, right? So I really want you to pay attention.
They say we only use a fraction of our brain's true potential. Now, that's when we're awake. When we're asleep, our mind can do almost anything.
Such as?
Now, imagine you're designing a building, right? You consciously create each aspect. But sometimes it feels like it's almost creating itself, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, like I'm discovering it.
Genuine inspiration, right? Now, in a dream, our mind continuously does this. We create and perceive our world simultaneously, and our mind does this so well that we don't even know what's happening. That allows us to get right in the middle of that process.
How?
By taking over the creating part. Now, this is where I need you. You create the world of the dream. We bring the subject into that dream, and they fill it with their subconscious.
How could I ever acquire enough detail to make them think that it's reality?
Well, dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange. Let me ask you a question. You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of what's going on.
I guess, yeah.
So how did we end up here?
Well, we just came from the,
Think about it, Ariadne. How did you get here? Where are you right now?
We're dreaming?
You're actually in the middle of the workshop right now, sleeping. This is your first lesson in shared dreaming. Stay calm.
All right, so I'm sure we get the point of the video, right? I still speaking to the place of keeping things simple, keeping things clean, right? If you look at this video, I like to see strategy as also creating worlds, right? Because like we said, you're the forerunner of the creative process. You're the one that is beginning the creative process, right? And on that note, you're bringing to life something that doesn't necessarily exist yet. That's why co-creation is important. You need to find ways. My network is such an just a follow sound. I don't see anything. Yeah, so sorry about that. Oh, the network does that to all of us. But anyway, as a strategist, you're like forming worlds, right? And at that point of forming, things are very fragile. In this video, you can see everything was going smoothly until a point of disruption, and the entire thing started going up in flames, right? Everything started destroying. And I'm sure most of us can remember certain presentations on projects that you've worked on, that things will be going smoothly. Then one small hiccup happens and the whole presentation starts blowing up in front of you, right? For those of us who are familiar with that, you can give you can give some form of okay, I can see you guys, right? So essentially that's what it is. It's a very delicate process. So you need to be as tactful, as skillful, as smooth as possible. So anything that reduces, tension is what you should do, right? I really hope you guys are following what I'm saying, right? I really hope, you know. All right. So on that note, your deck is your art. I don't write music, I don't paint anymore, I don't draw anymore, right? Personally, I studied architecture in school, so I've lived the creative life to an extent. Even once upon a time, in one of my former lives, I was a photographer, right? So always having an art has also made strategy my art right now, right? So your strategy document is not just a Google Doc, right? Every document you create is like your reputation. And essentially, it's an opportunity for you to create some kind of masterpiece. So no matter the thing you're working on, you need to put yourself into it. You need to look at it like your album. You need to look at it like you're doing something that is going to be consumed by the world, right? You can't be a Google strategist. And like I also made reference to the meeting that myself and someone else on this call attended. You do a document, and at the end of the entire thing, the client is telling you thank you for doing the work. Because essentially you can tell that this is not a Google document, right? And the way to do that is to be as thorough as possible, to keep the document as human as possible. Don't bombard it with too much text, with too much numbers, without an actual explanation. And also, one of the things that can be an enemy to you winning as a strategist now is ChatGPT. Yeah, right. It's a tool, but for so many people, it has become too much of a lifeline. So much so that we have ChatGPT strategists, right? We have a lot of kalu, a lot of 419 strategists, and essentially, when you rely too much on things like ChatGPT, right? It is the cheapest way to become replaceable, because the next person is essentially doing the same thing. So try to take your strategy document as an art, you know, as an art, right from the content to the way it is presented, and the rest of that. And then speaking to client conversion, right? A lot of the time we try to maybe bombard clients into coming on our sides, but the truth is client conversion is directly proportional to relevant conversations. You need to get to that point where you're able to make a conversation about everything. Even when you're presenting, the presentation should feel like a conversation, right? And essentially, strategy, especially for us admin, is a symptom of something. And when I say strategy, I'm also talking from a point of view of communications, right? Communications doesn't just exist in isolation. It's a symptom of either business, of brand, of marketing, of sales. So you need to be as wide as possible. That's the only way you can make a conversation out of anything, right? By being as versatile. Read books, read the news, always be within the context of what is happening per time, right? Understand your ecosystem, understand the ecosystem of the business your client finds themselves. And before you know it, it's no longer a question of winning over the client. It now becomes a question of conversing with the client. So a typical example, right? I was in a debrief session where they were just throwing demands. Oh, we want to do this, we want to do that, and the rest of that. And eventually, after slowing down the room, initially everything was moving so quickly. Oh, do this, do that, and all of that. But as the strategist, like I said, you're the forerunner of the creative process. So sometimes it is your responsibility to slow down the room and ask some relevant questions, right? Like, what exactly do you want to achieve? Because if you don't understand what the problem is, it becomes really difficult to actually arrive at a solution, right? So by slowing down the room, asking certain strategic questions, that debrief session changed from just a debrief to a conversation. Then automatically you find that your client is even writing your document for you, because they are sharing what they really want to see. They are sharing what, the problem actually is, because if you want to stay for Christians, right? There's this part of the Bible that says something about the letter killeth, but it is the spirit that gives life, right? If you just read certain briefs, you can never convert that client. You can never win that campaign, because the brief in itself is one thing, but what really needs to be done is a different conversation. So to be a strategist, to convert your clients, you need to be a master of context. You need to be versatile. You need to read. You need to get to that point where you can turn anything into a conversation. And essentially, the point of all of that is being a champion for your client, right? You're essentially championing the cause of whatever your client is trying to achieve. Because as we know, I want to assume that a lot of us here are comms people, and everyone knows that the essence of comms or advertising is to use creative means to reach business objectives. So your creatives are not just creative for creative sake. They are not just beautiful for beautiful sake. What differentiates an advert from art is purpose, right? What is the purpose of what this thing is going to achieve, right? So as a strategist, you must also understand that your job is to champion the cause of your client. If your client is trying to reach a certain KPI, your entire document, if you want to win that client over, if you want to win that campaign over, you need to champion that cause. Am I trying to establish myself as a differentiated brand? Am I trying to establish myself as a brand that everybody knows? That way, you know that awareness is this person's problem. What exactly am I trying to do, right? So in that journey to success for the client, as the strategist, you need to be the guide. When you have all of this understanding in context, it makes winning over your client or even winning your campaign, it gives you a different way to approach things, right? So you're more or less like the conciliary of your clients. You're someone that they are always happy to have you whispering in their ear. When you have gotten to the point of championing the cause of your clients, you realize that when they are in any meeting, they will be asking after you, please, can you put Jacob on this call, please? Because I think he has a way of just knowing what I want, and the rest of that. So as far as winning is concerned, it's not about frameworks, like I said. It's not about templates. It's some of all these soft skills, that put you in a place of authority. So on that note, I'd like to say that before you begin to build your documents, right? I know we like to build documents, but first of all, start to feel something before you begin to build. What is it that you want your audience to feel? Whether it's the client or whether it's the creatives you're trying to inspire to do good work, or whether it's the audience, or what do you want these people to feel? Then what do you want them to remember? And then what do you want them to do? Do you understand? And if you start there, your deck will never be boring again. And essentially, just like what Jam Jam said about how you meet strategists that make their hair, you meet people that are fun to be around. That in so many ways allows work to move along so much more faster. So I fancy myself as a thorough person, right? And in that thoroughness, there's a tendency for my presentations to be lengthy, in quotes. If anybody, anyway, lengthy in quotes. But the thing about that lengthiness is because we're trying to establish thoroughness. We're trying to be as comprehensive as possible. But even as long as certain movies can be, right? There's a way that a movie can be so interesting, you are not even feeling the time that is passing. So on that note, if you're able to establish feeling, what you want them to remember, what action you want them to take, I guarantee you that your strategy document will never be boring. That way, no matter how long it is, even people are always willing to sit down and listen. And hopefully we've been able to establish the software side of things, as to the position you need to take in order for you to, be able to produce documents that are able to help you win as far as campaigns are concerned, able to help you win as far as clients are concerned, right? But at the end of the day, what I like to call the trinity of winning both campaigns and clients is that you must be able to string certain important elements together. And one of those things is logic. The other thing is magic. And the third is action, right? And by logic, that's where all the insights coming, the data, the research, the whole shebang, right? Then when we're talking of magic, that's where creative leaps come in, right? When we say it's creative leaps, we're talking of would I say a contrarian way to seeing certain things, essentially being able to zag where everyone is zigging. And then by magic, within the magic space, we're talking of narratives, and by narratives, we're talking about storytelling. But also, very importantly, is emotion, right? What do you want these people to feel? I think at this point, I would just call myself the feeling. I'm the feeling strategist, right? I'm that person that wants people to feel things whenever I'm presenting. And I think in so many ways, that is the winning ingredient, the feeling aspect of things. But in the midst of logic, in the midst of magic, there's also the place of action. A lot of the time, our strategy documents are left hanging. There's no recommendation, there's no idea of execution, there is no idea of next steps. And like I said, there's a way you can build your document to the point where it feels like the first ad. And even if you're not in the communication space, it feels like such a working piece of material that you can actually take action based on that, right? Personally, I actually thought I would be able to kind of present a document, but I'm I'm not sure if I'm going to do that, or if I even want to do that. But from a technical point of view, right, most of my documents follow a certain pattern, right? It's a certain checklist. Aside from establishing what the brief is, it's clear it's be done is, so there's clarity. Strategies building our documents, the intention is to establish clarity. Sorry, I've been talking for a bit. Are we all still together? All right. All right. Cool. All right. So this is kind of the um, flow that a lot of my documents follow. Right. There's the brief, the understanding the job to be done. Then there's understanding the objective, so that you're not just being creative for creative sake, or being strategic for strategy sake, right? And then you will now maybe establish your approach. And by approach, it could possibly be the framework that your agency uses. But then you now dive into market analysis. And there are different ways to approach market analysis, right? It's either you're using the 4 Ps, you're using the 4 Cs, but essentially you're able to establish what the product is, what the price is, what the place is, what the promotions are, right? Then after all of that, I'd like to have like some form of recommendation, some takeouts and recommendation for what's happening within the market space. Then I jump into my consumer understanding, and that's where you can go crazy, right? You can do your social listening, and because we're essentially living in a time where our physical world and the digital world is merging together. When you're doing your consumer understanding, it would pay to lean a lot on the resources you can draw from digital, right? So understanding their need states. And remember what I said about comment sections, what I talked about social media. That is a survey. That is right. That is like a moving survey. Essentially, I'm even of the opinion that social media was made for marketers, because you just have multiple touch points to leverage, right? And then I move into what is the way in, right? After establishing what everyone else is doing, establishing where the consumer's headspace is at, taking all of that into consideration, how can you, what's the opportunity there, right? When you establish what that opportunity is, then you plug in your brand as to how is, what is the reason to believe within the context of the brand that is relevant to how the market can be won. You know, then you now establish your creative platform and then move on to creative execution, right? So with all of that being said, you know, a lot has been said, right? But at the end of the day, I want us, the take home, right, is that I want you to understand that you need to make your strategy something that moves people, you know. And you can tell from the get-go of when you're presenting and the rest of that, you can tell if you've lost people, right? But before you even begin, don't allow that exercise to be a thing of chance. Decide that you want your strategy to move people, you know. Make documents that feel like conversations. Don't you, every slide should not be abrupt. You should find a way to make sure each slide flows into the next, right? Develop your documents with the intention of making the room feel something. If somebody doesn't laugh during your presentation, there's a problem. If somebody doesn't say, ah, okay, there's probably an issue, right? Essentially, at the end of the day, make your document as human as possible. And if I also have to point out some of the tips I use, right? If I'm using like a horizontal format to presenting, my header, I essentially divide my presentations into three most of the time, or should I say each slide that makes up the presentation into three. The header is like a synopsis of everything that is happening within that slide, right? So that header tells you everything you need to know about the slide. Then there is maybe one graph, one pie chart, something to legitimize my headline, right? That's where you're going to get your statistics, you know, your pie charts, your bar charts, and then after that, there is the place of recommendation. So, what is the implication of your headline? What is the implication of your graph and all of that? You've made a hypothesis. You've proved your hypothesis. So, what is the implication of that hypothesis? So that way, you allow the document flow, right? Right. So on that note, I think I'm done. And on that note, I'll say it's essentially your turn. So based on everything we've talked about, everything you've heard, now what? So how exactly are you going to act differently, right? I really like to hear from everyone. You know, what exactly are you going to do differently based on some of the things that we've talked about? All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we still have 5 minutes to go. This is a wonderful class. Thank you so much. So the class should come up.
Somebody, you must say things, or I will call you. All right, Halima, please, let's go. And if you have any questions, you know, if you have anything that is not clear, let's make it a conversation, right? This is not a class or anything like that. We're just gisting, please. Go on, go on.
All right. Hi, Hale.
Hi,
Um,
Halima.
so I actually had a question. I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that for every slide, you have like a summary or a synopsis, and then something to legitimize that,
Mm-hmm.
be it a visual, and then it. So when you're trying to tell a story that follows through different slides,
Yeah.
do you still do that for each slide, or at the end of that, all you're trying to establish, then you now have a slide that gives the recommendation? Because that's how I naturally would approach it. So I wanted to just understand,
That
how would you do that? Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the thing I said about establishing a hypothesis, right? I do that for every slide. That's different from the takeouts and the recommendations. But just so that the slide is light enough to understand, I do that for every single slide. So for every slide, there is a header. Everything that the slide contains is summarized in the header, right? So probably we're looking at, say, there's nothing coming to my mind right now, but maybe there's like there are certain trends. For instance, maybe AI is taking over, machine learning is taking over. As opposed to just scattering them on the slide, the header will boldly speak to the fact that in a particular industry, innovation that cuts across AI, machine learning is the order of the day. At least when you see that, you already understand everything else that is going on, right? Then I now unpack all of that within the slide, which is the proving the hypothesis, which is the title, right? Then there's now a recommendation that says, okay, based on all of this, this is what you can do. And you see, the benefit of arranging slides that way is that when you now want to do the eventual takeout and recommendation, a big Jacob, better calm down. Oh. When you now want to do the actual takeout and recommendation, it becomes easier to do because you've essentially done them on the different slides. So you're essentially just picking the one that is relevant or the one that is strongest, right? So I hope that helps. Then I still do my recommendation slide as well.